Hi everyone. Assalamu alaikum and peace be on to you all. I'm Sophia Said, Executive Director of the Interfaith Center, your host and the sponsor of today's program, along all the other interfaith explorations. The co-sponsors for the program are Cobb Institute and the Process and Faith. Our our text, our resource, and our book, if we can call the website a book for this program, is Spirituality and Practice, which is a website that we have used for all of our spiritual alphabet classes. It's a website that serves people of all faiths and religions and spiritual paths and people with no faiths who are looking for spiritual resources, and it's founded by Frederick and Mary Ann Brissett. And here is Jay. Sandy, if you can spotlight Jay, our friend, our teacher, distinguished professor of religion, who has been teaching our interfaith explorations classes for 3 years, over 3 years now. Remember, our classes are recorded and all the videos can be found on YouTube. I also send you links of the videos in the weekly classes. So for that purpose, keep yourself muted when Jay is teaching us. And as soon as it's dialogue time, you're welcome to unmute yourself and share. We are doing two letters. We're doing J for justice and P for play. I'm excited for both of them, but especially P for play, because I don't think we have ever done that in our previous sessions ever. But let's start with J for justice, which is a very important tradition, an ethic, a value in all of our religious traditions, in Judaism, in Islam, and Christianity, and every other tradition that I have come across with. They all highlight and emphasize the value of justice. So, Jay, do you want to start with Jay? Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine, and I look forward to this. We'll do justice first, and then play. And just let me remind you, we're kind of trying to go through letters that we have not included before. And I myself had forgotten that we had done justice once before, so I think I chose justice, but here we go. And this is a tougher one, actually. And I'd like to put something up on the screen if I can. Forgive me, it'll take a little bit to get it up there, just because I'm not adept at this, but I'll get it. No. Here we go. So is everybody able to see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And I'll begin by reading a quotation from Desmond Tutu, and then I'll make some remarks, and then we'll just have a conversation. So here's Desmond Tutu. To pursue the path of healing for our nation, we need to remember that what we have endured. But we must not simply pass on the violence of that experience through the pursuit of punishment. We seek to do justice to the suffering without perpetuating the hatred aroused. We think of this as restorative justice. And I begin with that quotation because he certainly points to something extremely important. Can I have a passion for justice without bringing along with it a desire for punishment, that others be punished for the injustices that they may commit, and that can not include hatred, even of those whom we think are doing bad things. So justice without punishment, the impulse to punish, and without hatred. And this got me to thinking, and I invite you as well to think about justice as something you feel beckoned by within your own heart. So I'm going to call it the divine lure of justice within the human heart. And what is it? Well, it seems to me like it's a lure to break out of a private shell and preoccupations with personal fulfillment. It's a lure to listen to the cries of the poor and the powerless, the forgotten and the forsaken, the marginalized and the outcast. It's a lure to listen to the cries of animals and the earth, because they too can be treated unjustly and are. And it's a lure to respond to those cries with a desire to help create a different kind of world. A world that is creative and compassionate and participatory, everybody's voice is included, inclusive, diverse. That includes religious diversity, cultural diversity, gender diversity, all kinds of diversity. Humane to animals and good for the earth with no one left behind. Our phrase, many people use the phrase beloved community to name a world like that. And the desire is to create local communities that have that quality. And so what I'm adding is animals and the earth, so it's beloved community with ecology added and with other animals added. And if you feel this lure toward justice, you of course want to do your part. We all do. But it can require a shift in values. Seeking a world that prioritizes community over achievement. And that, in a way, is a critique of what we call meritocracy. And meritocracy is the idea, of course, that people should work real hard, play by the rules, and they can have as much as they want just so they work real hard and play by the rules. They deserve more. And so meritocracy really is at home with societies that are hierarchical economically. There can be very rich people and people in the middle and very poor people. That's okay as long as they earn it. They can be really, really rich. But the lure of justice says that community is more important than that. And the response to the lure toward justice can not just be personal, but be political. And I certainly have friends who I admire terribly that are lured by justice, and they've gone into politics. I think of one of my own colleagues that left teaching. I'll call him by name. His name's Jay Barth. Some of you may know him. That's his lure. It's justice. And all of this can be done, hopefully, in a spirit of love and hope and community, not righteous indignation or a sense of superiority or a desire for revenge. So then it got me to thinking, well, now what are the obstacles to justice? Well, one is power and privilege. One, with regard to other animals in the earth, is anthropocentrism. One is individualism, where, a sense of being an individual is more important, trumps a sense of community. And one is private spirituality. And I will unshare there. I have friends whom I deeply admire, and maybe you do too, who almost cringe every time they hear the word spirituality, because they associate it with a concern for personal fulfillment at the expense of the larger world. And they call it middle-class spirituality. It's very self-centered. It's, I'm trying to find my inner peace. I want to live with equanimity. I want to pray and meditate because I'm concerned with my personal well-being. And when I come across that way to somebody else that feels that is critical of spirituality, thus understood, they will say to me, Jay, I wish you were more alienated. I wish you were less comfortable. I wish that you were not so peaceful. I wish that you felt out of sync with the larger world. Because the world needs people that are alienated and not satisfied with the status quo. Who side with the poor and the powerless, and wherever there's brokenness, they share in that brokenness. They don't sleep well at night. And if you hear that sensibility, do you hear that? Can you understand the person that says that? Just nod your head. Please say yes. I want to tell you where that comes from, in part, historically. Just that comes, among other places, from the prophetic dimension of Judaism. It's in Judaism, historically, that we in the West inherited a sense that a prophet isn't someone who predicts the future. A prophet is someone who hears the call of God toward justice, announces that to everybody else, and that includes denouncing the status quo and announcing a new possibility, a new and more hopeful possibility. We can live in beloved community, and we're not. And the prophet then says to me, Jay, I admire people who don't sleep well at night. I admire people who are troubled by that and roll up their sleeves and help do something constructive. Okay. So if you hear what I'm saying, the lure of justice can result in a very uncomfortable life. Not especially happy, but meaningful. All right. I said two other things in my notes, and I'll say them for a minute, and then we'll just talk. Let me screen share one more bit. If I can remember how to do that. Yeah. I also want to just take note of the dark side of justice. People who have a passion for justice can be self-righteous. I'm better than them. They can be very dogmatic. They can divide the world into the lovable and the unlovable. And they can be without humor, without a spirit of play. Those are not essential. You can have it both ways. You can have justice and play, but those are darker sides that we see. So, does that prompt any thoughts, any ideas, any reflections, any critiques on your part or additions? Alan.
Well, I actually feel like I've made a lot of growth in this area recently, and because for a long time I have felt a lot of anger towards bigots.
Yeah.
And I recently read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi, and it really helped me let go of a lot of that. And getting my education at Hendrix, it's a fairly liberal school in general, and so that's part of what I learned in addition to my family, etc. But I've really, within the past 3 months or so, been having a lot of conversations with people who are on the other end of the spectrum, and have found that really meaningful. I've also had some discussions with a lot of my African American friends about specifically the term woke, and that what tends to happen is that people on the far left, on the left or the right, not even the far ends, they see these things occurring and they see these more extreme examples of what people are doing, and then they tend to transfer that to being generalized or indicative of a larger group than it actually is in some cases, in my experience. But much of the conversation is that woke has been hijacked to some degree by people who about 10% of those people have turned woke into something that is aggressive versus just something that is based on being aware or awake, which is actually the way in which MLK used it initially. We could all use to be aware and awake of issues, just going to that point.
Let's take them one at a time, Alan, because you mentioned kind of two things.
Okay.
Our approach to people on the bigots. Your example was bigots. Let's land on that one for a moment.
Okay, go ahead.
And see what Anne has to say. Anne?
It's a different question. Do you want me to wait until we discuss Alan's point first?
Yeah. Okay. Let's do.
Yeah.
Anybody want to respond to that side of what Alan was saying? How I treat those with whom we vehemently disagree. And we think they're anti-justice as we define justice.
Jay, can you hear me? This is Kim.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to that because I feel like I can relate to him coming from a place very, I won't say where I lived, but I left, and there were a lot of very hard feelings, and it's related to these things. I very much related to everything that you said about the lure of justice, and it's been very important to me all my life. And so it's been very painful the last few years. And I think that's really all I wanted to say about that.
Okay.
But
to get him, one question that I kind of wanted us to consider is there something, sometimes we associate spirituality with happiness, but I just want to ask, sometimes are we dwelling most closely with God when we're alienated and in pain? Just want to raise that question, and your comment raises it for me. Now, others, but let's get back to your comment. Others have a response to what Kim was saying there. Eileen?
Well, I first want to say thank you for putting these two together, which when I first saw them, I was like, oh, I don't get to do all of the letters, whatever. but they do kind of balance each other out, for which I'm incredibly grateful. But I had to laugh because we, a bunch of white middle-class people from my church, are going to Tulsa, and we're going to go to the Black Wall Street while we're up there.
Mhm.
And we're doing all of these things because we need to learn
Uh,
so much. And I think I've said this before in this class, I used to think I would never use woke because I'm not, in the good sense, or the bad one, I don't know. But this is a real struggle because I have family members as well that are diametrically opposed to most of what I believe in. And I feel like I have to, I'd like to hear how other people handle that, because our becoming beloved community that I'm a part of, encourages us to find middle ground, find common things. And sometimes it's really hard. And it's even, I found myself after a family reunion coming back in tears because we're never, I don't know how to connect. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Eileen. Dan.
Thank you, Jay. When I think about this, I think about being a parent and relating to my children, really being angry with them for some of the things that they do, and realizing that what I have to do as a parent is distinguish between the person and the behavior, and love the child, but not like the behavior, and never let the child feel that my dislike of what they have done stops in any way my love for them. So I think with people we disagree with on an opinion basis, it's really important that we distinguish what they believe or what they say from who they are. We're all children of the same God. And the person I'm in disagreement with is as much a child of God as I am, and deserves the love and respect that I wish for myself. So I'll just offer that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Carla.
So I had an interesting encounter a week or so ago and have been contemplating it since then. And it just goes right along with what you're talking about. More in the realm of righteous indignation.
Mm-hmm.
So I found out about a couple of individuals who, one, he means well, and he is expressing his anti-racism.
Mm-hmm.
And he encountered someone whom he assumed, he didn't even know the person, but through some things that were said, he made the assumption that this person was a racist and began to call him that. And the encounter did not end well. And even though I think he had justice as the basis of what he was trying to get across, so as I thought about this, and I thought back to a comment you made a few sessions ago about ahimsa.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very prominent word in the yoga tradition also.
Mm-hmm.
He says non-harming. So for me, I think justice has to be woven with kindness and harming. So
that maybe is it, Carla. Anybody else want to speak to this general? I think we're on the question, how do we enter? Well, I don't know what question we're on, but it's a good one, whatever it is. Mark?
So what I think is, and I really appreciate the way you framed the question. You know, ultimately, if we're going to create a just and truly prosperous world with a deep sense of what prosperity implies, we're going to have to do it together. And we're going to have to move towards one another, not away from one another. And that means everyone. So I think that whether it's a person who's a bigot or, you know, has such a fiery sense of social justice that there's a lot of anger and intolerance, like all those things have to be overcome. So I think we do have to have that larger overarching vision of what this better world looks like. And that implies a conversation so that we can all move away from where we are and move towards a world characterized by justice. And that's going to imply a level of sacrifice on all of our parts. So I think that's where my contemplations are, is like, what do I have to give up and so on? How do I do it?
Have any of us, have I, can you look back on an experience in your life where someone was angry with you because of what you said or what you did? And maybe you reacted a little defensively at the time, but a little later you realized they were right. And you found yourself glad for their anger. And I myself have a very vivid instance of this with regard to feminism. I was on my way to, I still am very interested in Buddhism. And I was really interested, and I went to Japan. And I was on my way to a Buddhist monastery. And I stopped in Los Angeles to meet someone I wanted to recruit to come to Hendrix College to speak. And I stopped there, and I remember the afternoon I met her, and she said, I knew of her, and she said, what's your name? I told her my name. We talked a little bit. And she said, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm going to Japan to live in a monastery. And I think I was a little proud of myself, you know. And she said, why are you doing that? And I'm embarrassed to tell you what I said, but I will because we're friends. I said, I want to transcend my ego. I want to transcend my ego, and that's what Buddhism is about. I think. So I'm going there. And she looked at me with glaring eyes, no smile, and she said to me, you go transcend your ego. But some of us don't have an ego in the first place. I'm an abused spouse. I know what it's like to be a nothing, a doormat, something people walk on. I'm not trying to transcend my ego. I'm trying to get one. You go. And I think that was one of the first times in my life I can remember being challenged in a very good way to realize my experience was contextual, gender defined, middle class defined, and not universal. And I was living out of the presumption that my experience was normative. To this day, I'm quite grateful for her anger. And I think she was dead right. Now, to you, have you ever had an experience like that where you've been challenged and been made uncomfortable? And you look back on it and you think, you know, thank you. Thank you for your anger. Anybody? Alan?
I just wanted to speak to how sometimes tension is necessary. And, you know, the Sunday worship is actually the most segregated we ever are in at any time of the week as far as race is concerned. Now, that is not true with the people in this group who obviously work across those issues, but that is a reality. And I also want to be honest about my work with the Cobb Institute. I think they are incredible at advocating for animals and the earth in terms of those issues. I do believe in No One Left Behind, but it doesn't specify a lot. And I do, the Pomona Compassionate Community is obviously a great example. And I am very sorry I missed out on the recent lecture on Afrofuturism. But I also want to say that there is a lot of avoidance of racial issues and LGBTQ issues, and that learning how to do that part is essential to also respecting the animals and the earth, learning how to relate to those issues. So I just wanted to express that.
Yeah, and Alan, I think that you put it well. Is there something good sometimes about that tension? About that tension, being challenged in that way. Anybody else want to speak to this? Shall we move on to play? Or shall we stay here? I need to have a sense of where the group is. We'll move to play, but we can come back if we need to. So, Sandy, if you would call up that, or I'll do it. I thought I'd read for you what the Brossets say about play. This is how they put it. Coyote, Nasrudin, St. Francis and his order of Jesters of the Lord, Zen masters, Taoist sages, Hasidic storytellers, clowns and performance artists. Such prophets and all the spiritual traditions have them encourage us not to take ourselves too seriously. They say that what we know is not worth knowing, and what's worth knowing cannot be known through our ways. To our sensible selves, their actions seem silly, shameless, even shocking. But they have an important role to play in the spiritual life. They carry the banner for the spiritual practice of play. Play is the exuberant expression of our being. It is at the heart of our creativity, our sexuality, and our most carefree moments of devotion. It helps us live with absurdity, paradox, and mystery. It feeds our joy and wonder. It keeps our search for meaning down to earth. Practice play by doing things on the spur of the moment. Take time out to experiment, to try on different parts, to relax. Laugh heartily at jokes, situations, and yourself. Remember, laughter heals body, mind, and soul, and by extension, communities. So that raised two questions for me and maybe for some of us. How does laughter heal communities? And is there a place in the spiritual life for craziness? Deb.
For me, play is has no other purpose than to make me happy, which is expressed in laughter and smiles and all of that. The minute you attach a deeper meaning to it from the outside in, that this is what it means, it ceases to be play. If it produces something that is tangible, that is useful, fine, but that's not its primary purpose and not its only purpose at all.
Thank you, Tiff. Deb, sometimes when you lean forward, your voice leaves the microphone.
I know.
But we're still catching everything you said, and it's a great comment. Anybody else want to make a comment? Add to the hopper of play. Lynn.
Oops. Yeah. To me, there are ways that play can potentially equalize and have people together in a way that's freeing. Humor sometimes can be inclusive, but it also can be exclusive.
Mhm.
But it's interesting for me. It can help community to happen spontaneously and kind of break barriers. But like I said, sometimes it can be done in a way that is excluding others. And that's, I guess, that's all I need to say.
Yeah, I mean, let's just remember what Lynn just said. Humor can be at the expense of people, and it cannot. It can go both ways. But I think that's why we love self-effacing humor the most. You know, when people can joke about themselves, it's especially refreshing. Mark, unmute.
Yes, sorry. I think the connection between the point that went somewhat unaddressed about tension and so on in play, like the connection for me is tension becomes very difficult between people when it leads to an absolute rupture.
Yeah.
And there's not a willingness to bridge the divide. You know, sometimes like we have to stand in that moment authentically, as you described your experience with the woman as you're on your way to Japan, and learn the truth that someone was sharing with you. But, you know, the ultimate rupture in human relationships, of course, is warfare. And that can take many forms. But I think that often after there's been a moment of tension or a moment of uncomfortable sharing of a truth, like to be able to then stand together and laugh, to be able to restore that softness, that childlike, supple, you know, quality can be the thing which joins us, which unites us back together, and then we progress. Because ultimately, these issues are so complex. We have to learn to walk together, to learn together. And, you know, I'm afraid that what happens too often is the righteous indignation or the anger or the intolerance of prejudice, you know, in all directions, whatever it is, it makes it impossible to make further progress when it sunders the connection, when there's no more learning, no more listening.
Thanks, Mark. Anybody want to build upon what Mark said or add your own thought? Dan?
I love that these are in combination, justice and play, because they offer balance to one another. And I think humor and entertainment are all ways of getting away from the hardness of life. I love humor, and I'm notorious for telling stories and jokes. And I'll give you a one-liner. A man says to his wife, "My dear, you should embrace your mistakes." So she did. She gave him a hug.
Okay, all right. Anybody want to tell another joke? That would be fine. Tim, go ahead.
Well, I had a kind of an experience with that with a physician and a resident recently, and it was a great lesson in how humor can diffuse a tense situation, because the resident and I did not get along very well. And the main doctor came in and told a joke, and it was political, and it was so unexpected that I just laughed. And so I left that doctor's office laughing instead of, you know, being all mad like I had been. So I find it to be absolutely essential, you know, in getting through all this time, and of course, you know, through the COVID times, and and all of that. And I just have to ponder sometimes because, and I started to relate to comedians because in my despair and pain, I became the funniest person around. It's like my friends, every time I would lament something, they would just start laughing. And so it helped. It's vital.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of comedians as priests, imams, rabbis, in disguise, because they are channels for something. Now, anybody else want to make a comment? Jennifer?
Just wanted to comment. I'm sorry, I've got a weak connection, so I'm leaving my camera off. I think you asked about how play can enhance communities. And from my understanding, joy is an attribute of the soul. And as such, it's a magnet. And so people normally tend to want to be around others who are laughing and having fun, and reject people who walk away from, distance themselves from those who are angry and mean. And so I think it's just a natural unifier and connector to have joy. And like you say, it softens the disconnects, the moments when people are not in connection. So I just wanted to add that as an attribute of the soul. It's a spiritual event when there's laughter.
Nice. Thank you. Now, there's kind of two more subjects we can talk about, but if anybody's got something they want to say right now, please do. If not, Viv, is your hand up? I can't see. Oh, please, yes. Unmute, thanks.
Yeah, what's coming to me is I've been involved in what's known as Alternatives to Violence Project training, introduced by Quakers in prison settings. And that uses a lot of play. We call it light and livelies. And, you do something like pass the face. And the next person does that, and it just gets a lightness in the air that feels like it allows a depth to also be felt. And I think in that kind of place, it's a little bit like the Mass, and I don't know about other faith traditions where there's a depth that can be gone to, and then the height that can be reached in the process. It's a both and rather than an either or.
Lynn, and then we're going to turn to two more topics that are related to this and building upon what Viv said.
Yeah,
Lynn?
Real quickly, I wanted to say my dad is 94 years old, and I know that it's not easy for him in ways, but he has a sense of humor, often corny, that I think gives him a lot of resilience. And the other thing I was thinking is he could go anywhere and with humor engage people, the line at the store or whatever. Anyway, it helps, I think, with resilience and connection with others. Proud of that may be what helps him to live as long as 94.
Well, I think I'm going to live longer in terms of the jokes that I've heard today from Dan, and so this has been such a fun interlude. Let's just take note of the experience of liminality. Are you kind of familiar with that idea? Liminality, liminality. And one way that liminality is understood, it's a time where there's freedom from rules, freedom from the normal structure of life. And you enter into another space, and in that space, there's a playful liberation. It would be like going to a circus. And when you enter into the tent of the circus, everything's kind of different. And it's not the ordinary world, it's a different world. And it's refreshing because it's different and outside the rules. Now, sometimes worship services can be their own kind of liminality. You leave ordinary life and enter into another time. Then you go back. But the Mass, the worship service can be sometimes liminal. But all kinds of things can be liminal. Music concerts can be liminal. Rock concerts can be liminal. There's a kind of human need to step outside the everyday into the liminal. Does anybody see any connection between that and play and what we're talking about? Do you have liminal spaces that you yourself enter? Whatever they are. And you feel liberated, and there's an opportunity for refreshment and play.
I would like to say, this is Diane.
Hi, Diane.
I take care of my grandson who is 10 years old or 9 years old. And that is my place where I sort of enter that. I play with him. I do nothing but focus on him. We play basketball. We play games. But it's just also it's my time of joy. And whatever else is going on in my life, stop during that time. And so I would say that I definitely experienced that with that.
How old is he?
He's 9 years old.
And have you been doing this for several years? I imagine you have.
Well, I've actually been taking care of him since he was 2 months old. So, go ahead.
Oh, I just had a question. I want you to go back a little earlier, say when he was 5 or 4, when he could enter into imaginary worlds very easily. And I wanted to know, were you able to enter into those imaginary worlds also? Can you play? Could you play with him and become that?
You know, he was not much of one to do the imaginary worlds. No, I'm trying to think. That's a while back now. I mean, if he did, I did, because I've played with him. Wherever he is, that's kind of where I've gone. It's been the joy of my life. So I will always treasure all this time with him because it is just amazing. And I've been very fortunate to have the time and, to do it with him. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. On imaginary worlds, an example would be, did any of you have imaginary friends when you were young? Or did your children have imaginary friends with names?
My son did. He had he had an imaginary friend named Huber.
Well, if you happen to have an imaginary friend, how about throwing out the name? I'm just curious what mine was BB. And we've got Huber. Anybody else for imaginary names?
I remember when I was like 3, having a long line of imaginary friends that I made my mother wait for in the elevator before we could go down to the park. There were all kinds of animals and people. I don't remember all the names, but I remember that. That was.
Well, if your mom waited at the elevator for all those imaginary friends to come out,
yes,
she knew play too. She entered into the sphere of play.
Yes, she did. She did. And my kids all had imaginary friends. And yeah, it was a big part.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Mark?
Not imaginary, but fictional. I always say that it was Casper the Friendly Ghost who was my first spiritual teacher, because he wanted to be friends with everyone.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's real too. Big role in my life. But in terms of the liminal spaces, I mean, I think I used to be a public librarian in downtown Dallas, where, you know, literally we would have on any given day hundreds, if not thousands, of people who had been dumped off of buses, you know, coming from the state prisons, being released, mentally ill people, homeless people, and so on. And one of the things we tried to do to work with that population is to create normalizing experiences. So we would have movie night, we would have music classes, and I worked a lot with house plants to try and get people the opportunity to escape from, you know, the urban context, which they were kind of trapped in. Because I think the value of these liminal spaces, going out in my garden, going out in the woods, going to a concert, whatever it is, it helps me achieve the ability to see reality and my circumstances in the world from multiple perspectives. And oftentimes, I think when people are trapped in anger or in intolerance or whatever it is, like the root cause very often is that they're stuck in one monotonic mode and they see the world through a single lens of monopolarity. And to the extent we can help ourselves and people like move to different places and see things differently, like that could be very helpful and healing on our kind of journey.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I do wonder if when people garden or get out in nature, if it's entering into a kind of ecoliminal place that frees the heart and frees the imagination. Ecoliminality. I think in our remaining time, I'd just like to know, and I don't quite know how to put the question, but is there a place in life or what is the place in life for holy fools? Holy fools. And you know, medieval Christianity had a tradition in communities. There would be a holy fool, and it sometimes it could be somebody that really was in some ways out of touch with conventional reality. Spoken parables, spoken stories, you know, didn't make sense in terms of conventional reality. But they came to be respected because they were wise in their crazy way and sometimes funny. And so it's the trickster personality, the holy fool who truly stands outside conventional ways of thinking and is beautiful for precisely that reason and needed. Can't have community without fools. Anybody want to speak to that, the role of holy fools in life? Do you have any holy fools in your life? Ellen?
I guess I'm uncomfortable with the term fool.
Yeah.
And in, you know, calling someone that, and maybe that's because of the way I was taught, you know, don't call anybody names, don't do those kinds of things. But what I was thinking is that this week I had the privilege of going to the Robinson Theater to see David's Sedaris, who I really enjoy on TV. It never occurred to me to see him in person, but a friend offered me a ticket. And he was pointing out things, and some of the things he said I didn't laugh at because they just were even too offensive to me. And I appreciate his kind of humor, but we can't laugh about children being killed in their schools. And he was trying to form that into a situation to make us aware of what was going on, but also his job is to be funny. And so that was not funny. And there were many of us who felt that you can only go so far with those kinds of things. But he did point out many, many other societal issues that you need someone to break that tension, because we, you know, with 24-hour a day, every day news feed and all of that, you need someone to put the news in a different perspective. So I appreciated what he was doing. Also, again, I wouldn't call him a fool, except perhaps these things that he said, which I didn't think needed to be in his routine. Anyway, that was the most recent.
I want to say just a word about the word fool, but then your point is better than the point I'm about to make. There's something fool in that's actually the name they used, and in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they have a persona that they say exemplifies crazy wisdom, and a lot of the Tibetan teachers exemplify in their manner of teaching crazy wisdom. That's the phrase they use. And it's wisdom that contravenes conventional thinking. But in that very act is wise. And so it breaks rules, habitual rules of thought. So they call it crazy wisdom, and it's a compliment. It's a compliment. And actually, when I was using holy fool, I didn't mean it demeaningly at all, actually. It's a compliment. But it's to take a word that's sometimes used negatively and to transvaluate it. It becomes positive there. I just want you to know that's what I had in mind. I'm not interested in calling people fools in a demeaning sense at all. But I'm interested in recognizing crazy wisdom.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you for telling me.
I'm imagining there may be a few rabbis that have crazy wisdom.
Well, we've got a whole film situation where we've got all kinds of stories talking about people who come from this, what I thought was an imaginary town in either the Ukraine or in Russia, but turns out there is such a place called Chelm. But these are people who are fools and do really silly things. And these stories have been around, for hundreds of years now, because people need that release, and they also want to see, well, I'm not as silly as these people from Chelm, so let's continue to teach this to our kids.
I myself try to walk in the footsteps of a rabbi who had crazy wisdom. So his name was Jesus. I don't know, I'm talking about that one.
I've heard of him, yeah.
He spoke in parables. He said a lot of things that didn't make much sense to people. He broke all kinds of rules. Anyway, okay. Deb.
I think our definitions change over history and over time. And I understand what Ellen was saying for sure. But more in the line of what Ellen was saying, my son, who has severe learning disabilities, ADHD, he sees things in ways that I would never think of seeing them. Points truths out very clearly. He does it to his teachers. He gets in trouble for it, but it doesn't stop him. And kids who have different neurological wiring in their brain, I have a granddaughter like that, really understand and express things that in ways that I would never see.
Thanks, Deb. I think we're about to run out of time, and I want to hear from Sophia Said if I can. Sophia, do you want to bring us to a close and share your reflections?
Well, I don't have much reflections except that I really enjoyed today's session, and partially because in the spiritual alphabet, there are different letters that speak to us, and J for justice has always spoken to me very strongly in who I am and what I do and how I live, but not P for play. And in the last few years, when we have done spiritual alphabet, we never did P for play before. And it's wonderful that we did them together because they do balance each other out. For me personally, I've always struggled with looking at joy or laughter or jokes as a spiritual practice for years. And it took a lot of effort from me to cultivate the sense that laughter is a holy thing. It's a sacred thing. It could be as sacred as silence or prayer. And I understood it with time that actually laughter gives us resilience and strength. And it helps us enhance our practice of and strengthen our practice of justice when we practice it. So I'm glad that we did it. I learned a lot today. I still struggle with laughter and joy as a spiritual practice. But I want to close back on J for Justice, which is a letter that I strongly identify with, and probably because there's a famous Sufi saying in which Sufis say that love is like an ocean which comes from God, and it gushes through you and pours out of your heart into the public square. But when love pours out in the public square, it looks like justice. It is recognized as justice. And that has stayed with me since when I heard it for the first time, which was 2 decades ago. And I know that we all practice justice in our own ways, whether we carry different slogans or banners or buttons or wear T-shirts or bumper stickers, or whether we sign petitions or do political action or adopt a career of social justice by going into politics, community service projects, philanthropy. But we all have our own ways to express our own ethic and value of justice in the society. I have always been deeply inspired by artists and musicians and singers, and how they have used their art to promote justice, especially by singers like Pete Seeger, who wrote "We Shall Overcome," that became an anthem for civil rights movement, and I still enjoy it to the day. Songs like "Redemption Song" by Bob Marley, "Imagine" by John Lennon, "Blowing in the Wind" by Bob Dylan. So last time when we did Justice, I actually played "Imagine" by John Lennon and at the end, and I thought of doing it, but then I realized that our video was actually copyrighted. So we cannot play these songs, cannot put our videos on the YouTube. So today I thought that in the end, I will just read some lyrics of one of my favorite songs. So let me close by reading the lyrics of "Blowing in the Wind," which is written by Bob Marley. And it goes as, "How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years must a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? How many times can a man turn his head and pretend he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? How many ears must a man have before he can hear people cry? How many deaths will it take till he knows how many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. And with that, I close today's session. We'll see you all next Wednesday. And peace, salam, shalom to you all. Have a wonderful week.